Something extraordinary happened in Washington, and almost no one is talking about it. Donald Trump's own top military commanders, the generals and admirals who served directly under his command, sat before the United States Senate Armed Services Committee and, under oath, delivered testimony that directly contradicts everything Trump has been telling the American public. We're not talking about anonymous sources or opposition leaks. We're talking about the uniformed commanders of the most powerful military on earth, admitting that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are resurging on a global scale, that America has gone dangerously blind in critical regions of the world, that terrorist organizations now have the will and intent to attack the American homeland, and that the United States military has the capability to open the Strait of Hormuz but isn't doing it. The question of why is exactly where things get deeply alarming. General Dagvin Anderson, the commander of AFRICOM, the United States African Command, testified that Al-Qaeda and ISIS-linked groups are not just surviving but actively thriving across the African continent, particularly in the Sahel region. He used the word epicenter, not a concern, not a challenge, an epicenter of world terrorism. And when Senator Angus King pressed him directly, do these organizations have the capacity to turn their will and intent into an actual attack on American soil? General Anderson's answer was chilling. He said the number one priority of his entire command is developing the intelligence capability to know when these groups shift from intent to actual operational capacity. And then he admitted something that should have been front-page news everywhere. Right now, they don't have sufficient assets to make that determination. There is, in his words, a black hole of intelligence in the Sahel. America is essentially flying blind over one of the most dangerous terrorist breeding grounds on the planet. And that blindness is a direct consequence of the funding cuts, the gutting of surveillance assets, and the strategic retreat that has unfolded under this administration. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments, because this story is affecting every country connected to American security guarantees, and that is most of the world. If you believe the world is entering a far more dangerous phase of political and global instability, subscribe now, because the next major escalation could arrive faster than most people expect. General Anderson explained that his command requested $94 million for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, the tools needed to monitor these terrorist networks before they strike. They received $19 million. That is roughly 20% of what the military's own commanders said they needed to keep Americans safe. 20%. Meanwhile, China and Russia are filling every vacuum the United States leaves behind, not just militarily but informationally. General Anderson testified that his forces are currently in a purely reactive mode when it comes to Chinese and Russian disinformation campaigns across Africa. With full funding, they could build proactive, sustained information operations across the entire continent. With $19 million, they're playing defense against an adversary that is spending aggressively and strategically to replace American influence with their own. And this isn't soft diplomacy. This is a deliberate, coordinated effort by Beijing and Moscow to reshape the geopolitical loyalties of an entire continent, while the Trump administration has effectively handed them the keys by dismantling USAID and withdrawing soft power tools that took decades to build. Senator King made a critical point during the hearing. If a major terrorist organization were to seize the capital of Mali, it would be a geopolitical game changer. It would dramatically elevate their international standing, attract new recruits, unlock new financing, and give them the time and space to develop the operational capacity they currently lack. General Anderson agreed. He said that scenario would give momentum to these organizations and move them closer to the capability and capacity needed to threaten the United States directly. And then Senator Wicker asked the pointed follow-up, who would benefit most from that outcome? The general answered diplomatically, but the implication was unmistakable. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping would find ways to exploit precisely that kind of destabilization. The same two leaders that Trump has been accommodating, flattering, and offering strategic concessions to throughout his presidency. Now let's move to the Strait of Hormuz, because what came out of this hearing on that subject is arguably even more strategically significant. Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of CENTCOM, testified before the committee and confirmed something the administration has been carefully avoiding acknowledging in plain terms. The United States military has the capability to physically open the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping has been significantly degraded. Where there were once 20 to 40 Iranian fast boats patrolling those waters, there are now 2 or 3. The missiles, the drones, the naval assets, all dramatically reduced. So why isn't the United States reopening the strait? Why was Operation Project Freedom, the naval escort mission that was successfully enabling commercial vessels to transit those waters, quietly shut down? Admiral Cooper deferred to policymakers, but Senator Blumenthal pressed the point directly and cut through the diplomatic language. The reason the strait is not being opened is because Iran still retains enough residual capability to strike oil infrastructure across the Persian Gulf. Even a degraded Iran can hit Saudi Arabian oil fields, UAE terminals, Kuwaiti installations, and the moment that happens, global oil prices spike catastrophically, sending economic shockwaves through every major economy on Earth. So the administration finds itself in an impossible position of its own making, militarily capable of acting, but economically terrified of the consequences. And critically, the strait sits at the center of active negotiations, which means Trump has essentially handed Iran a veto card in diplomatic talks by failing to use military leverage before sitting down at the table. Senator Alyssa Slotkin raised a dimension of this crisis that cuts even deeper into the administration's credibility. She pressed Admiral Cooper on whether Chinese intelligence is being provided to Iran, real-time or near real-time targeting information that could be used to locate and strike American forces in the region. Cooper declined to discuss specific intelligence in an open session, but he confirmed something that is extraordinarily significant. The Iranian military is in large part equipped with Russian and Chinese weapons systems. The intelligence architecture around those systems is a classified matter, but the publicly available reporting, and Senator Slotkin cited it directly, suggests Chinese companies and possibly the Chinese government itself are helping Iran target American forces. She called it a Rubicon. And she made the point that whatever conversation Donald Trump was having with Xi Jinping at that exact moment needed to confront this reality head-on, regardless of party or political calculation. The response from the administration has been silence and worse, concession, because at the same time these military commanders were testifying about Chinese support for Iranian operations against American forces, the administration was reportedly offering Chinese companies access to advanced H-200 chips, loosening the very technology export controls that were designed to prevent China from closing the gap with the United States in artificial intelligence and advanced computing. The market celebrated. National security analysts had every reason to be alarmed. Senator Mazie Hirono went directly at one of the most consequential decisions of the entire Trump era, the withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal negotiated under President Obama. She asked Admiral Cooper directly, "Did the president ever explain to you why he tore up that agreement?" Cooper was in a different assignment when the decision was made 8 years ago, and he said candidly that he was not part of that conversation. The point Senator Hirono was driving toward is one that deserves to be stated plainly. The Iran nuclear crisis that the United States is now navigating, the enriched uranium stockpile, the proximity to weapons-grade material, the collapsed diplomatic framework, is a direct consequence of unilaterally abandoning an agreement that was working. Multiple nations were party to the JCPOA, international inspectors were on the ground, Iran's nuclear program was constrained. Trump blew it up because he didn't like the fact that Barack Obama had negotiated it. And now the United States military is spending hundreds of millions of dollars, risking American lives, and destabilizing global energy markets, trying to address a crisis that was, in large part, manufactured by that decision. Senator Jean Shaheen's questioning about Ukraine then introduced another layer of strategic irony that the mainstream narrative continues to undervalue. Admiral Cooper confirmed that the United States military has adopted a significant number of tactics, techniques, and procedures that were passed to them by Ukrainian forces, battlefield innovations developed under fire that are now being used to protect American personnel and train American partners. Think about what that means. Ukraine, fighting for its survival against a Russian invasion, has become one of the most important sources of real-world military knowledge for American forces and for allied militaries across multiple theaters of operation. President Zelensky's forces have been instrumental in helping democracies build and sharpen their defenses. And yet the Trump administration has been systematically undermining American support for Ukraine, lifting sanctions on Russian oil that are now generating billions of dollars a month for Putin's war machine, and negotiating in ways that appear to treat Ukraine's sovereignty as a bargaining chip rather than a principle worth defending. Senator Gillibrand's questioning was perhaps the most legally and morally significant of the entire hearing. She asked Admiral Cooper directly whether his forces had conducted investigations into publicly available reports that 22 schools and multiple hospitals were struck during military operations in Iran. Cooper confirmed that there is one active civilian casualty investigation, 1 out of 13,629 munitions expended, one investigation, and the specific incident he acknowledged was the strike on the Manab Elementary School, where over 160 children were killed. When Senator Gillibrand pressed him on why other incidents reported on the front page of the New York Times, documented by international observers, corroborated by on-the-ground reporting, had not been investigated, Cooper's answer was that there was no indication those reports could be corroborated. Senator Gillibrand pushed back immediately. The indication is what's publicly available. Reports exist, they have been published, they are being discussed globally. And the answer from CENTCOM's commander was that his command had not investigated them. She demanded a report. He agreed to provide one. But the underlying reality of that exchange is deeply disturbing because the administration has cut 90% of the personnel responsible for civilian casualty review and avoidance. The very infrastructure designed to ensure American military operations comply with the laws of armed conflict has been gutted by Pete Hegseth's Department of Defense restructuring. And these military commanders are now conducting operations in a theater with almost no institutional oversight, no functional review process, and no accountability mechanism for the deaths of civilians, including children. Senator Shaheen, speaking in the broader context of the Trump-Zeki summit and the unraveling of American global leadership, articulated something that the administration's supporters consistently refuse to acknowledge. America's strength in the world has never rested solely on the size of its military or the depth of its economy. It has rested on the credibility of its alliances, the reliability of its commitments, and the perceived coherence of its strategic vision. When you dismantle foreign assistance, alienate allies, gut soft power institutions, lift sanctions on adversaries, offer concessions without demanding reciprocal gains, and conduct foreign policy based on flattery and personal relationship dynamics rather than national interest, you don't just weaken America in the short term, you rewrite the global perception of what America is, what it stands for, and whether it can be trusted. And that perception, once lost, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. China walked into its summit with Trump carrying a clear list of strategic objectives: Taiwan, technology access, trade terms, influence over regional security architecture. According to every available readout, the Chinese side emphasized Taiwan's eventual reunification as a central theme, while the American side emphasized how powerful and brilliant Xi Jinping is and how much Chinese food exists in the United States. The asymmetry of that engagement is not merely embarrassing, it is strategically dangerous because Xi Jinping is watching Ukraine and drawing conclusions about American resolve. He is watching the Strait of Hormuz and drawing conclusions about American deterrence. He is watching the gutting of USAID and drawing conclusions about American staying power. Every signal he is receiving tells him that the window of opportunity to act aggressively, whether in Taiwan and the South China Sea or through continued support for Iran, is widening, not narrowing. The situation is escalating rapidly, and few people outside of Washington fully grasp how many pressure points are now active simultaneously. Terrorist organizations resurging in Africa, an intelligence blackout in the Sahel, Iran retaining a strategic veto over global energy markets through residual military capability, Chinese weapons and potentially Chinese intelligence enabling attacks on American forces, a diplomatic framework in shambles, Ukraine being slowly abandoned, Taiwan arms sales frozen, research funding cut, scientists and researchers being driven out of the country while China absorbs them, and all of this is happening while the administration's public messaging insists that ISIS is gone, that Iran has been defeated, that America is winning everywhere it looks. What these military commanders testified to under oath tells a fundamentally different story, and the fact that their testimony given publicly on the record before the United States Senate has received so little sustained coverage is itself a strategic failure of public accountability. Pressure is building behind the scenes in ways that rarely make it into the daily news cycle, but the structural deterioration of American power, soft and hard, is accelerating. This changes the strategic calculation for every adversary watching and every ally reconsidering whether American security guarantees are still worth depending on. The consequences of that recalculation will not arrive with a press conference or an announcement. They will arrive as events, and by the time most people recognize what has happened, the architecture that prevented those events will already be gone.